Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into our workshop on the greenhouse gas tool and report. We're really excited to be able to share this tool and report with you and hope that it will be of utility to you in current and future investigations. We have a wonderful team of EDGI members that will be presenting to you today. My name is Kelsey Melcher Burroughs, and I'm a Northeastern student who is working with EDGI through my capstone course. Now I'll pass it to our other members to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Niamh Carlos. I am also a Northeastern student working with EDGI for my capstone course as well.
And my name is Nost. I am an assistant professor of geography at the University of Guelph in Guelph, Canada. And I will be demoing our greenhouse gas reporting program analysis tool later in this presentation.
So here we have our agenda for today. We will be continuing with a brief introduction to the Environmental Data Governance Initiative, the Environmental Enforcement Watch, and the Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program. Following that, we will have a description of our data science tool and preliminary findings of our report. After that, Eric will do a brief demo of our greenhouse gas tool. And then finally, we'll close and we'll share with you some information in case you want to get in touch with us. So I'm first going to introduce the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative. It was actually formed in November of 2016 out of an email thread with the goal of documenting and analyzing changes in environmental governance under the Trump administration. The first project was a series of networked events, the goal of which was to archive federal websites and data sets, and this was termed data rescue. So who are we today? Today, we are more than 50 active members from academic institutions, nonprofits, and grassroots organizations from a variety of professions. Some members are paid, but for the most part, members are volunteers. And what do we aspire to? We aspire to hold governing agencies and industries accountable, to promote transparent, collaborative, community-centered environmental research, technology, and decision-making, and to model these democratic values in our own organization and work. And to the right here, you can see some headlines that were inspired in part by EDGI's work.
So I'm going to introduce the Environmental Enforcement Watch, or as we lovingly call it, EW. And EW analyzes and engages with the data from the EPA's ECHO database, ECHO standing for Enforcement and Compliance History Online. And EW really aims to make this data from ECHO more readily accessible for people like you, for journalists, so they can help inform the public, shine a spotlight on compliance and enforcement issues in our country. And EW's done some really important work, especially recently. There was a recent report from EW that found a decline in policy enforcement during the COVID outbreak, which inspired the publishment of 17 newspaper articles, like the one here below. Next, yeah. So why are we focusing on greenhouse gases? GHGs are currently summarized solely in terms of a country or a state or province or city's carbon footprint. So for example, under the Paris Agreement, the US reported emitting about 6.5 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent in 2005 and pledged to cut that in half by 2030. And in some ways, this makes sense, since nations have the power to set and enforce strong policies around climate, but GHGs should really be quantified by company and regulated as so, because fossil fuel companies are large contributors in the climate crisis, and they're not held accountable to the extent they should be in our current system. For example, they heavily underinvest in green energies. They restrain and often delay policies that support the growth of green energy. And they are very talented at constructing and manipulating the movement denying the existence of climate change. Some other greenhouse gas data sets include the report from the Carbon Majors database, and they make their GHG data available by company. But EDGI's tool, on the other hand, adds data from EPA's greenhouse gas reporting program and then connects that data from those facilities to their parent companies, and is also publicly available to everyone. And then additionally, the Public Economies Research Institute Greenhouse 100 Polluters Index is a 2021 report, and it's based on 2019 data. But on the other hand, EDGI's tool uses current data and can be run over and over again. So what is the Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program, or GHGRP? It's an EPA program that requires reporting of greenhouse gas data and other relevant information from large GHG emission sources, fuel and industrial gas suppliers, and CO2 injection sites in the US. So there are approximately 8,000 facilities that are required to report their emissions annually. And the GHGRP accounts for about 90% of those emissions nationally. And the focus is really on industrial direct emitters and some suppliers above certain thresholds. When we talk about direct emitters, we mean facilities that combust fuels or otherwise put GHGs into the atmosphere directly from their facility. So for example, a coal burning power plant that emits CO2. Suppliers are entities that supply products into the economy, and then if those products are combusted or released, they can oxidize and release GHGs into the atmosphere. So for example, a company that sells gasoline. And there are no limitations for the maximum quantity of GHGs that facilities are allowed to release.
So what is the Environmental Enforcement Watch's greenhouse gas data analysis tool? It's a data science tool using the web-based platform Jupyter Notebook. It uses self-reported data from the Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program to analyze greenhouse gas emissions by parent company and to create accompanying visualizations. And the data and code used in the notebook are available to the public. Also, this tool is reusable. So in a year's time, or in 5 years' time, or in a couple of months, you can use this notebook again to see how things have changed. So now we're going to take a look at some notable preliminary findings that our team discovered through using the tool, and that can be found in our report. So first, 56% of direct emissions of greenhouse gases in the United States in 2020 were found to come from facilities primarily classified as fossil fuel electric power generation. The emissions from the largest direct emitter, a coal-fired power plant in Alabama, are equivalent to the annual emissions from over 3,500,000 vehicles. We also found that the 10 biggest emitters by individual facility are nearly all power plants. And finally, the one facility in the top 10 that isn't a power plant is an oil refinery, specifically ExxonMobil's Baytown, Texas facility, which recently experienced a major industrial accident leading to several injuries. So taking a closer look at findings related to parent companies, what's reported to the Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program is each facility's highest level US-based parent company. So in the GHGRP, as well as in our tool, we are not capturing subsidiaries or shell companies, nor foreign ownership. The top 10 companies listed here on the bottom left account for over 20% of all direct emissions of greenhouse gases. And the top 50 account for half of such emissions. In contrast, if you look at the bottom right, you can see that just the top 10 owners of supplier facilities account for over half of all supplier emissions. And you might also notice that ExxonMobil can be found in both of these charts. It is the 8th among direct emitters and the 4th among suppliers. And now I'll pass it off to Eric for our demonstration.
Great, thank you so much. So what I'm going to do is lead us through a demonstration, a demo of how our greenhouse gas reporting program analysis tool actually works. So I've loaded the tool up in my browser here, and anyone in the world can access this tool in their own version of it or their own copy of it at this link, which is also available through our website and through other means. So anyone with this link and a Google account can run our tool for themselves. You would simply enter this link into your browser, log into Google when prompted to do so, and then you will have the ability through the Google Colaboratory platform to run the calculations behind our findings for yourself. So we start here with just a little bit of an introduction about how to run the notebook, and then also some of the background that was previously presented in terms of what the EPA's greenhouse gas reporting program is, what it counts, what it doesn't count, so on and so forth. So all of that background information is embedded in the notebook itself here, with links to further resources from the EPA. Now, I have already actually run the notebook, so I'm not going to give you the full demo of how to, actually clicking on things as we go along. But the long and short of it is, if you want the full analysis, all the data calculated for you, you can go up to runtime here and select run all. And that will complete all of the calculations behind our findings for you. You can also go step by step. So the first step here is this cell of code. Now this notebook has both cells of text, such as this one, that give us a little bit of context and instruction, as well as cells of code, such as this one. Basically what we're doing is we're going through cell by cell and running the code that we need. So you would press play here, and you might be prompted, that a message or a warning from Google that they didn't author the notebook. You would simply just accept that warning and move on. You know that we wrote the notebook. You don't need to worry about that warning. The notebook would run, and it would produce the results that said something along these lines, basically done. And here, what we're doing in this cell of code is simply setting up some of the stuff we need for the later parts of the analysis. In this second cell, what we're doing is we're actually getting the emissions data from the EPA. We basically call up their website where they have a zip file of the greenhouse gas reporting program data over the past, since the 2011 or so. And we get the 2020 data in particular, and we load that in. And you should get a result after you press play here that says something like data loaded. Now you can actually, if you're interested in downloading that data for yourself, that data will appear in the Files tab here on the left. So once we run this cell of code, all of the spreadsheets, Excel spreadsheets that the EPA has for its greenhouse gas reporting program show up over here. And as I said, you can actually go back to 2010, 2011, all that kind of historical data there. But again, for this particular analysis, we're looking at the most recently available data, which is for 2020. And you could download this to your computer like so. Now, moving on with the rest of the analysis here, there is some number crunching that needs to be done with EPA's data sets in order to make it more meaningful. They have different categories of emissions, as we've mentioned: direct emitters, those directly releasing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere; suppliers, those who supply fuels that are later combusted, releasing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. We need to separate that out and also, compile together different specific kinds of emitters. For instance, onshore oil and gas production and gathering and boosting are different kinds of direct emitters that the EPA differentiates, but that for our purposes, we're going to lump together as direct emitters. So we do that in this cell of code, which after you run it, produces some of those findings that we were just hearing about in terms of the top 10 facilities in the for direct emitters and for suppliers. So we heard that nearly all 9 out of 10 of the top 10 direct emitters are fossil fuel electric power generation facilities. So that finding is confirmed here. The one that isn't is that ExxonMobil Baytown site that we were mentioning, which also shows up as a supplier. So not only is that site directly emitting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, it is also a supplier of processed petroleum, gasoline, that is later combusted, so it counts as a supplier as well, or other products that it produces get measured under the supplier category. So we continue to move on to the notebook. This just exports our data so that we can download it here, the facility by facility data. But of course, we're interested not just in the facilities, the plants that are releasing greenhouse gases, but the companies that own those facilities. And so we load in the company information from the EPA, which looks something like this. We combine it with that list of facilities that we've already seen and already loaded in. And that allows us to get something after a little bit more data wrangling in these cells, something that looks like this, where we have separately for direct emitters and suppliers, facilities, and over here, the parents, the companies that own those facilities, and the share of their ownership in that facility. So for the 5 examples we see here, the facilities are 100% owned by the different companies. Okay, there are cases where companies own 50%, 25%, something other. They co-own a facility, and we account for that in the aggregate emissions that we calculate. So for instance, in this cell, we can look at some of those facilities that do have multiple owners. So here we have a facility in Ohio, the Anderson's Marathon Holdings facility. That is owned partially by the Andersons Inc., 50% stake, as well as Marathon, which has 25% stakes. So basically 50%. And we divide the facility's emissions to, or we assign the facility's emissions to the parents based on that ownership stake. So the facility in total would have something like 164,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent of greenhouse gases released in 2020. Half of that goes to the Andersons Inc. because they own 50% of that facility, and half of it ultimately will go to Marathon Petroleum Corp. So stay tuned, we'll see more about Marathon Petroleum Corp in a second. So once we've done that, we can summarize finally the companies, not just the facilities, in their greenhouse gas emissions. So here we have that information. First, for direct emitters. Vistra Corp is the largest company in terms of direct emissions of greenhouse gases in 2020. 91 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent in 2020 across 40 facilities that it has some ownership stake in. Berkshire Hathaway, as an investment company, Warren Buffett's investment company, owns a lot more facilities, but a bit fewer emissions. We also have summarized this for suppliers. So here again, we see the Marathon Petroleum Corp show up, 21 facilities, including that one in Ohio we looked at. Quite a number of emissions, 400 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And we were hearing about what that equates to in terms of, hours of electric usage per home, that sort of thing. Those are additional calculations that you can make using some of the greenhouse gas equivalency calculators that the EPA has on their own website and that we link to elsewhere. So in terms of the top 10 parent corporations, they own or account for 22% of all emissions covered under the greenhouse gas reporting program, whereas those top 10 companies, supplier companies, account for over 50% of all emissions reported under the greenhouse gas reporting program. And here we see that number again, summarizing the number of companies. And here, this is where the notebook becomes a bit more interactive. So we can break this down by specific states and not just for the US as a whole. So here we could choose to focus in on, say, Iowa. So after running this cell here, we get presented with a list of states as well as territories. We might focus on Iowa. After selecting that, we can move to the next cell, run it by pressing play, and see the emitters in Iowa in terms of which company owns facilities in Iowa and their emissions. So here we have Berkshire Hathaway comes in number 1 here. Alliant, which is an electric utility for the eastern half of Iowa and central Iowa, is not surprisingly one of the largest direct emitters in the state, as well as the agribusiness ADM. And we could return up here to select a different state, say Nebraska, and run the cell again, so on and so forth. We can also look back at the national trends again and look at specific kinds of facilities. So for instance, we might look at universities, just because they happen to own facilities that report greenhouse gas emissions. They own campus power plants that are on the hook for reporting to the EPA. And it happens that the Michigan State University and its campus power plant releases the most greenhouse gas emissions of all universities that report or are listed under the greenhouse reporting program. Now, this does not account for any investments that these universities may have in power plants or other fossil fuel generating activities across the country or indeed the world. This is solely looking at universities' ownership of specific facilities. So we're not talking about stocks and divestment here. We're looking at, ownership usually of campus power plants. And here we chart some of that information. We can also look at specific cities. Cities often run public utilities that we can look at in this data. Searching for city of in our list of parent owners. So here we see that the city of Los Angeles owns facilities that release greenhouse gas emissions, more so than any other city in the country. And we break this down by suppliers as well. We chart this in this cell. And finally, you might be interested in looking up other kinds of owners, whether that's a specific owner or a specific type of owner. And so for instance, what I've done here is I've run this cell, which turns on that search bar. I've entered the name Exxon because maybe I'm interested in figuring out specifically where ExxonMobil stands. And then I run this next cell to get the numbers only for Exxon or anything that matches the name Exxon. We could think of other utilities here like Alliant, again, is not just, in Iowa, it operates elsewhere. And so we could look at its summary emissions as a company. We could search for specific kinds of owners. So, city of will get us the results that we had up here. We could think of other public utilities or other search terms, and we could enter that in that search bar and get the results here. So this is an overview of how the EU Environmental Enforcement Watch's Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program Analysis Tool works. And again, this is publicly available to anyone and everyone. And indeed, we would be more than happy in working with you, collaborating with you to make fuller sense of this, to help you run it, and to get even deeper into the data that is available, if not fully accessible. So I'll turn it back over for just a few more resources.
So that concludes our presentation on the greenhouse gas report and tool hosted by us here at EDGI. Thank you for turning into this presentation. We appreciate the support and the interest. Feel free to use these links below if you have any questions or would like to contact us. And thanks so much and have a good day.